You're merging onto the highway on a Tuesday morning, dodging cars weaving wildly across lanes, and you ask yourself, has everyone suddenly forgotten how to drive?
Right, it really feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, and the short answer, according to the latest research, is yes. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're taking a hard look at the erosion of roadway competence. We're using a bunch of different articles and studies, all centered around this exact issue, to figure out why driving in the U.S. feels so much more dangerous lately.
And you know why the phrase dumber drivers is suddenly everywhere in the traffic safety data.
Exactly.
It's a phenomenon that feels incredibly abrupt to anyone commuting right now. I mean, we tend to view careless lane changes or people drifting onto the shoulder as individual failures.
Like just isolated moments of really bad judgment.
Exactly. But those are merely the visible symptoms of a much broader systemic breakdown. We are witnessing the human brain fundamentally struggling and failing to interact with the sheer complexity of modern environments.
And to figure out why that breakdown is happening, we have to start inside the cabin of the car.
Right, the environment we actually control.
Because the most immediate, drastic change to our driving environment is this fierce, relentless competition for our focus. I'm looking at data here comparing distracted driving to drunk driving, and the risk factors are no longer just comparable.
They're staggering.
Yeah, distracted driving is actually eclipsing intoxication in terms of raw danger.
Wow.
We aren't just talking about a quick, guilty glance at a text message anymore. People are fully engaging with social media feeds.
Yeah, it's wild.
There are documented cases in the sources of drivers actively streaming video while operating heavy machinery at 65 miles per hour.
I mean, the mechanical reality of streaming a video behind the wheel is terrifying when you really break it down.
It's completely disconnected.
Totally. You are entirely removing your visual attention from the road, your manual attention from the steering wheel, and your cognitive attention from the actual physics of moving through space.
Your brain isn't even in the car.
Your brain is effectively completely disconnected from the physical vehicle.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I look at modern cars, and I feel like we're treating the driver's seat like a moving living room instead of an actual control center.
Oh, for sure.
We have these massive touch screens, ambient lighting, multiple audio zones. But I have to push back a little on the idea that only frivolous things, like video streaming, are to blame.
Okay, go on.
The research also explicitly calls out navigation apps and GPS maps as major contributors to this distraction epidemic. So are helpful GPS directions really contributing to this dumber driver phenomenon just as much as watching a movie?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying mechanism of cognitive overload. Your brain doesn't, neatly categorize inputs into frivolous and helpful when it allocates processing power.
It's all just data to the brain.
Exactly. It just sees raw data.
Yeah.
And the human brain has a finite, strictly limited amount of working memory. When you are navigating a modern urban environment, you're already operating near maximum capacity.
Yeah.
You're tracking the speed of surrounding cars, watching for brake lights, scanning for pedestrians.
Calculating following distance, all of that.
And then you introduce a GPS system that visually displays a complex 3D map while simultaneously projecting a voice telling you to prepare for a multi-lane merge in 500 feet.
So the brain is treating that helpful instruction as just another massive download it has to process.
Worse than that, it creates a bottleneck. When cognitive overload hits, the brain is forced to start dropping packets of information. It's a biological triage.
Like a computer freezing up.
Right. Reaction times slow down exponentially because your neural pathways are simply choked with data. Even a helpful GPS pulls critical resources away from your primary biological imperative.
Which is survival, basically.
Which is actively scanning for unpredictable, immediate physical threats. So you know exactly where your turn is, but you entirely miss the cyclist slipping into your blind spot because your brain's processing queue was entirely full.
We are fundamentally maxed out.
Completely maxed out.
And that leads to a fascinating behavioral shift. Because our brains are so overloaded by all these digital inputs, we start looking for ways to shed some of the cognitive weight.
We want to do less work.
Right. We start outsourcing the actual physical task of driving to the car itself, which brings us to a massive technology paradox.
The integration of advanced driver assistance systems, or AASS.
Right.
We are talking about lane keeping assist, adaptive cruise control, automatic emergency braking, features designed to act as a safety net.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the documentation suggests these features are actually creating a deadly false sense of security.
Yeah.
It's like bowling with the bumpers up.
I like that analogy.
You stop paying attention to your stance, your release, and the pins because you expect the mechanical system to bounce you safely away from the gutters. You just throw the ball and look away.
The clinical term for that is automation complacency, and the neurology behind it is quite insidious, to be honest.
How so?
Well, the human brain evolved to be highly alert when actively engaged in a task that requires continuous survival calculations. But when the car takes over, the micro-adjustments like centering the steering wheel, perfectly pacing the sedan in front of you.
Doing all the subtle work.
Right. The brain experiences what's known as vigilance decrement. It recognizes that the immediate physical demand has vanished, so it powers down its active threat assessment centers. It goes into standby mode.
Wait, so the driver isn't just physically resting their hands? Their brain has literally checked out of the driving loop.
Literally checked out. And this is where the system completely fractures. Because these assistance features are not flawless, fully autonomous drivers.
They need lines on the road and good weather.
Exactly. They rely on predictable infrastructure. When they encounter something outside their programming, a faded lane line, sun glare blinding the camera, a sudden patch of black ice, the system abruptly disengages and hands control back to the human.
But remember, the human's brain is in standby mode.
Exactly. And it takes time to reboot.
How much time are we talking about?
The transition from a passive, disengaged state to active crisis-level hazard management takes the average human brain roughly 1.5 to 2 full seconds.
Oh, wow. At highway speeds, 2 seconds is a terrifying distance to travel blind.
It really is. The delay in reaction time, as the driver snaps back to reality, attempts to comprehend why the car is beeping, and locates the threat, is often the difference between a minor swerve and a catastrophic collision.
Because they weren't paying attention to begin with.
Right. The technology prevents 1,000 minor fender benders, but it leaves us wildly unprepared for a single critical system failure.
We've engineered away our own situational awareness.
We really have.
And if our brains are routinely going into standby mode on the highway, and we aren't actively practicing the hundreds of micro decisions required to navigate a car, those physical skills have to be deteriorating. It's a literal muscle atrophy, but for driving.
Skill fade is the natural consequence of automation complacency. When a complex psychomotor skill is no longer routinely practiced, the neural pathways responsible for executing it begin to degrade.
So we forget how to drive.
We are seeing a measurable deterioration of basic road competencies, yes.
The data highlights this across the board. We're talking about fundamental failures, an inability to judge closing speed when merging, tailgating, because the concept of a safe braking distance has been lost, and just, zero anticipation of hazards unfolding a quarter mile ahead.
Basic defensive driving is vanishing.
Exactly. But I want to ask about the demographics of this. Is this a case of veteran drivers who have been on the road for 30 years actually forgetting how to merge? Or is it that we have a whole new generation of drivers who slip through increasingly lax, fragmented licensing standards and simply never learn the mechanics in the first place?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a compounding disaster involving both demographics.
So it's everyone.
Unfortunately, yes. It's an undeniable failure in standardized driver education. We are handing over keys to vehicles that weigh 2 tons and operate at high speeds, often without requiring rigorous defensive driving instruction. But we also have to account for a massive historical anomaly that accelerated skill fade for highly experienced drivers.
The COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly.
The pandemic hangover. The research points out how drastically our physical relationship with the road changed during that period.
The sudden absence of traffic completely rewired our expectations of the road. I mean, for the essential workers and individuals still driving during the lockdowns, the empty highways removed all natural friction.
There was no one in their way.
Right. That environment bred a culture of extreme speeding and highly aggressive, unconstrained movement. The guardrails of social expectation were gone.
And when everyone else finally came back to the office, those aggressive drivers didn't just quietly dial it back to the speed limit.
They maintained those reckless baseline habits. They didn't slow down.
Yeah.
Conversely, millions of people barely drove at all for over a year. And driving is much like a spoken language. If you don't practice the vocabulary of reading traffic flows, checking blind spots, and timing intersections, you lose your fluency.
Your skills get rusty.
Taking a year off from daily, high-density commuting resulted in a massive decline in operational confidence and spatial awareness for a huge segment of the population.
So you essentially have these rusty, hesitant, highly anxious drivers suddenly forced to share a lane with people who just spend a year treating the interstate like a lawless private track.
Yes.
And all of them are surrounded by brand new drivers who never received proper instruction,
You're mixing high velocity, high anxiety, and profound incompetence.
which is a perfect recipe for conflict. And when you take that volatile mix of drivers and drop them into the environment outside the car, specifically increasingly dense urban gridlock, you get explosive emotional volatility. The infrastructure itself seems to be weaponizing these bad habits.
Urban congestion acts as a massive psychological pressure cooker.
Yeah.
As cities expand and traffic density compounds year over year, the physical space between vehicles shrinks. This creates chronic, unavoidable environmental stress.
And stress isn't just an emotion, right? It physically alters how you operate a vehicle. We're seeing intense tailgating, brake checking, and terrifying road rage incidents escalate.
The chemical reality of chronic stress behind the wheel is profound. When you are trapped in gridlock, your brain perceives a loss of control, which triggers the release of cortisol and adrenaline.
Fight or flight.
It initiates an amygdala hijack. Blood flow and processing power are literally diverted away from your prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for logical, long-term decision-making, and dumped into the primal reactive centers of the brain.
So you aren't even thinking straight.
Not at all. Your peripheral vision physically narrows into tunnel vision. You become impulsive.
Wow.
A driver cutting you off is no longer processed as a minor inconvenience. Your brain processes it as a direct physical threat.
So we are biologically primed for a fight just by sitting in traffic. And I think there is a broader cultural shift amplifying this, entirely separate from cars. We live in an era defined by frictionless, instant gratification. Our digital lives have completely eroded our physical patience.
Oh, without a doubt.
Think about it. You get furious if a video buffers for 3 seconds on your phone, or if a package takes 2 days instead of 1. Now, apply that same instant gratification brain to sitting behind a minivan at a red light.
It's a disaster.
We have entirely lost the cultural muscle memory for waiting our turn.
That cultural impatience is perhaps the most destructive element we're discussing today. Driving, fundamentally, relies on a cooperative social contract.
We all have to play along.
It only works if everyone agrees to sacrifice a tiny bit of individual efficiency for the safety of the collective. You yield the right of way, you leave space for a merge, you stop at the yellow light, trusting that others will reciprocate.
But that trust is gone.
It has been replaced by a culture of individual urgency. When your psychological need to be 3 car lengths ahead completely overrides the safety of the intersection, the social contract shatters. It replaces a predictable, flowing system with hostile chaos, where every other vehicle is viewed solely as an obstacle to your immediate gratification.
Okay, so we have brains suffering from severe cognitive overload, and over-reliance on cars that puts our vigilance into standby mode, physical driving skills that has severely atrophied, and a hyper-stress culture that has completely abandoned the social contract of the road.
That sums it up.
It really does feel like an absolute free-for-all out there.
The convergence of these psychological and technological factors paints a rather grim portrait of our current infrastructure.
So what does this all mean? I have to play the skeptic for a moment. Are we absolutely sure drivers are truly worse today across the board?
Okay, fair question.
Or do we just live in a world where everyone has a 4K dash cam on their windshield, recording every single minor mistake and uploading it to the internet? Maybe human beings have always been terrible at driving, but now there is just undeniable high-definition proof blasted into our social media feeds 204/7.
This raises an important question regarding perception versus reality. Visibility bias is a very powerful psychological mechanism.
Because we see it all the time now.
Because an extreme road rage incident or a multi-car pileup goes viral and gets broadcast to millions of smartphones instantly, it skews our perception of frequency. We feel hyper-aware of the bad apples because the algorithm guarantees we see them.
Right.
It is important to acknowledge that a massive portion of the population still maintains their vehicles, prioritizes focus, and drives defensively.
So the silent majority is still relatively competent.
However, while the visibility bias amplifies our fear, the raw statistical data confirms that the danger is not a digital illusion.
The numbers back it up.
They do. The measurable increases in pedestrian fatalities, the rising severity of high-speed collisions, and the documented spike in distraction-related incidents prove that there is a fundamental negative shift in roadway safety. We are seeing it more, but it is also genuinely happening more.
The baseline competence has absolutely dropped.
Yes.
But we aren't completely helpless here. The investigations into this trend don't just stop at pointing out the flaws. There are clear, actionable solutions on the table to reverse this erosion of competence.
The path forward requires a multi-pronged approach. From a legislative standpoint, it means implementing penalties for distracted driving that genuinely reflect the danger.
Like taking it seriously.
Treating the smartphone with the same legal severity as an open container of alcohol.
And addressing the skill fade through standardized, rigorous driver training. Closing the loopholes that allow poorly educated drivers to pilot massive vehicles in the first place.
But perhaps the most critical shift must come from the vehicle manufacturers themselves.
Oh, the car design itself.
The automotive industry needs to radically rethink its design philosophy. Instead of designing complex, screen-heavy environments that encourage the driver's brain to enter standby mode, they must design systems that actively support attentive driving.
Keep the human engaged.
The technology should be engineered to keep the human operator firmly in the cognitive loop rather than trying to replace them piecemeal.
It's the difference between building a tool that enhances your ability to perform a dangerous job safely versus building an entertainment center that occasionally asks you to steer.
That is precisely the design pivot required to rebuild our competence.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want you, the listener, to keep all of these invisible mechanics in mind. The next time you're on your morning commute and you get cut off by someone drifting mindlessly across the median, take a breath.
Yeah, it's not always personal malice.
You now understand the massive web of cognitive overload, technological reliance, and cultural impatience that is actively driving that terrifying behavior. More importantly, this is a chance to evaluate your own habits. Take a hard look at your reliance on your vehicle's safety features. Are you using them to enhance your vigilance, or are you bowling with the bumpers up?
It demands a level of active self-awareness that is uncomfortable but absolutely vital for survival on modern roads. And as we close, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the psychology we've unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
We've spent this time discussing how convenience features in our cars are actively eroding our physical and mental driving competence. But it makes you wonder if our human brains so quickly and so willingly abandon essential, potentially life-saving survival skills the very moment technology offers to do the heavy lifting. What other critical everyday life skills are we quietly losing to digital convenience without even realizing it?